Okay, so we've talked about the heart, the physiology of the heart. Now we're going to talk about the actual vascular system. Okay, because here we did the cardio component. Okay, we've done all the cardio. So now we're talking vascular. So when we talk vascular, notice that we go from arteries to capillaries. Okay, arteries are the largest. Okay, and the arterials, old tells you it gets smaller, to capillaries, which are single cell. Then notice we go from capillaries to veins, and again the veins are the largest, and a venule, Yule is telling you it's the smaller. So literally we go from large to smallest to larger to largest again. Okay. Now the important thing to pick up on here is that we have the same three parts in both. Okay, the tunica media, the tunica externa, and the tunica intima. Okay, when we talk about those, keep in mind that we're looking at the three layers. So we have the endothelium, we have the smooth muscle, and we have the fibrous connective tissue. Now the smooth muscle, remember about the smooth muscle, we talked about this in terms of vasoconstriction and vasodilation. We have to be able to control the size of our vessels. Now what's cool is when you look at this, you can see the endothelium. We have the loose connective tissue. Now both have loose connective tissue, but there seems to be a little more with the vein, and part of the reason is because of this valve. Veins have valves. Okay, it's just one of those things. Now the lumen term simply means the opening. The lumen of the artery simply means opening. So you can see that the size of the vein, as we looked at here, is so much larger. I mean, you can see that this is huge, okay, compared to the artery. Okay. Now the other thing that's interesting is also notice the size of the opening. Okay, you can see that the wall here is much smaller than this wall. And again, part of the reason is we have this valve here, but the main reason we see a difference in the wall is the existence of what's known as these elastic laminas. In other words, what's kind of cool about arteries, if you remember watching Tom and Jerry cartoons, they always showed the hoses when they were carrying water getting large. You saw this thing running through the hose, right? You'd see the water running through the hose. It got bigger. That's kind of what this does. It has the ability to expand as blood passes through it, and then it returns to shape. Remember, that's what elasticity means. So the presence of the elasticity makes the arterial wall much larger than the vein wall. In addition, you can see that this opening, there's no pressure here. So part of the reason we have to have this elasticity is because of the pressure that the arteries are under, whereas veins, there's no pressure. Okay, so there's no pressure to contend with. Now, when we look at these, again, you can see the reminder of the layers. Notice that we lose all of this layering when we get to the capillary. Okay, the capillary strictly consists of endothelium, and it's literally a single cell in diameter. In other words, red blood cells have to travel down capillaries single file. Okay, literally that's what's going on. So in a capillary they travel single file. There's no room for anything else. Okay, now the differences, the primary differences, okay, we've already hit on some of them. The walls of our arteries are thicker. Okay, the lumen of the vein is larger. Now, the other addition is because of the presence of this valve, we have what's known as milking that occurs within the veins. In other words, how blood gets returned to your heart, since there's no pressure, okay, there's no pressure in the veins, how blood gets returned to the heart is because of skeletal muscle. The skeletal muscle in our bodies literally contracts and forces the blood to return to the heart. Now, in addition, as we've already mentioned, the capillary walls are a single cell thick, and this is where exchange occurs. So the actual business of the function of the cardiovascular system, which is to pump blood and allow the exchange of O2 and CO2 and other wastes, it occurs at the capillary level. Now, when we talk milking, again, since arterial blood is pumped by the heart, it's reinforced. So again, remember we said that there's pressure here. Okay, the walls and this increase in pressure and this elasticity, the elasticity, guys, reinforces the heart's pumping. So literally, that's why we can feel our pulse. you can feel your pulse because the veins expand here and then return. That literally reinforces and does that pumping that keeps the blood flowing. Okay, now veins don't have that because there's no pressure. So literally the contraction of skeletal muscle squeezes the vein. This is part of the reason why our veins run through our muscles. Okay, and it squeezes it. Notice that the valve below, inferior to the muscle, closes, and the valve superior opens. And again, the importance there, blood remains going in one direction. It's a one-way path, and that's real important to our cardiovascular system working appropriately. Now, at the capillary beds, notice that we have two major types of capillaries. Okay, we have what is known as the vascular shunt, and we have what are known as true capillaries. Remember that the function of the capillaries, okay, the purpose of the capillaries is exchange. Okay, so the purpose of our capillaries is exchange. Whoops, where is that? Oh well, the purpose of the capillaries is exchange. Okay, so if we're talking about exchange, oh, it was written right there. Duh. All right, so the purpose of the capillaries is exchange, but we don't always need everything open. It's sort of like if we're not exercising, do our muscles need a lot of blood? Well, no. So we're going to kind of close these off periodically and keep blood going through. Now, can our cells live forever without oxygen? No. So these open and close as needed based on the activity of the cells. So we have opening and closing based on activity. And this is kind of important because it keeps our bodies efficient. We're not sending blood where it's not needed. We're not exchanging in areas that are not active. And so if another area is more active, it needs the blood more than anything. It's sort of like what we saw when we look at the sympathetic and parasympathetic, fight or flight. If you are getting ready to exercise, or it's an emergency, or you're having to run for your life, you do not want your body sending blood and doing exchange of CO2 and O2 in your digestive system. That's definitely secondary to survival. So this is why we have to be able to control it. And the important thing here is to notice these sphincter muscles. The sphincter muscles are actually rather cool. If you look at these, we have these sphincter muscles that literally control blood flow. So they are another form, they're a smooth muscle, and they will close down or open up based on what we need. Now, major arteries of circulation. Okay, this is similar to the diagram in your color plates, okay, and the same thing with the major veins of circulation. So again, you need to know the major veins and the major arteries. So common carotid, that's kind of a given. The subclavian, the aortic arch, the coronary arteries, the thoracic aorta. You should know that there is a celiac trunk, okay, and have an idea of what some of those are. Renal artery, okay, renal means kidneys. We know there's going to be arteries going to our major organs, the kidneys, the stomach, the liver, etc. Okay, you have palmar arch, you have femoral arteries, okay, both deep and surface, okay, you have a popliteal, you have a tibial artery, both anterior and posterior, and you have what's known as the dorsalis pedis. Well, guess where the dorsalis pedis is? You should be able to interpret that. Okay, you have the iliac artery. Mainly, I don't necessarily want you to know the internal iliac, but I do want you to know where the common iliac is. Okay, mesenteric again. Remember the mesentery is that area of fat that covers our internal organs. It's okay. You need to know the brachiocephalic. You need to know the axillary artery. You need to know the ascending, the brachial, thoracic versus abdominal aorta, just general area. And those are the primary ones that you need to know. Okay, those are the arteries that you need to know. All right. Now, vein-wise, in terms of veins, you need to know the subclavian. That kind of makes sense. You need to know there's a brachiocephalic, a brachial vein. You notice here we're getting into the veins associated with our internal organs. So again, just kind of know generally if I have a splenic vein, well, that's the spleen, etc. You do need to know the jugulars, obviously. Okay. So you need to know the jugular veins. You need to know the superior vena cava, the great cardiac vein, and so I'm sure the coronary artery and the cardiac vein, you can figure out where those are. Hepatic vein, you have a whole hepatic portal system that's associated with that. Just kind of know it exists. You need to know the inferior vena cava. You need to know that there's an ulnar and radial vein, and then you have the common iliac again. Now, the other one down here, we have a femoral vein and we have a great saphenous vein. The saphenous vein is really kind of cool because when you have a heart bypass, they steal from our saphenous vein. It's wild. And then you should know there's a popliteal and a tibial artery, you know, anterior, posterior. Just know there's a tibial artery. I'm pretty happy. And then dorsal digital. Again, just interpret the name. Now, quick look at the brain. You can see all kinds of blood supply to the brain, which we kind of know is necessary based on what we did with the nervous system. Here is a little look at the hepatic portal system. This is really a complex area. This is actually why if you get wounds to your abdominal region or damage to your liver, you can bleed so fast and you can have so much internal bleeding and things like that. So there's just a lot of veins going on in here, and you can see some of this. Now, this one's kind of cool because you can see how circulation of the fetus is. Remember from the previous chapter, we said that there was a separation between the mother and the fetus, and you can see some of the complexity associated with this. Consider this context, guys. I'm not going to ask you about this. You should know what the umbilical, about the umbilical vein, okay? But that's about it. All right, now pulse points, we kind of talked about this. You already know there's different places you can take your pulse points. Notice that our pulse points are all arteries, okay? And that's real important. And what's kind of cool too is based on our pulse points, they also can serve as a diagnostic tool. So if you get damage, like let's say you break your leg, remember when we did the case study at Parsons Bowl, and they checked her tibial artery or her dorsalis pedis artery? They were wanting to make sure that there was a pulse there, because if there's a pulse there, that means blood flow was still continuing through the break point. So that's important. In addition, we use this to monitor blood pressure. Okay, so we have systolic, which is peak contraction, and diastolic, which is relaxation. When we talk about blood pressure, one of the things that we talked about a little bit with the heart, remember, is when we look at blood pressure, sometimes the diastolic needs to be monitored more closely than the systolic. Because the diastolic, since it's resting, it's relaxation, if that pressure is really, really high, the heart has to work extra hard to overcome it, and we have congestive heart failure. The heart walls thicken, so that myocardium has to get stronger to overcome the pressure, and that's not good, because then we take up more space within our pericardium. We're putting increased pressure on the heart, less room to maneuver, less area within the heart to pump blood, etc. It's just kind of a positive feedback spiraling badness. Okay. Now, in issue, you can see here the change in the pressure. So remember, we said that there's lots of pressure with our aorta and our arteries, right? And there is no pressure within the veins. Okay.